Good evening. Rip it up and start again, but keep bulk surveillance. That's the recommendation of the UK's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation. David Anderson QC delivered his report on existing legislation and how it meshes or doesn't with laws in other jurisdictions to the Home Secretary today. Examining the bulk surveillance that Edward Snowden brought out into the open, he called the powers that the police and security services have to monitor calls and emails undemocratic, and said that judges, not ministers, should be the ones to authorise interception. He wants a new law which would be comprehensive and comprehensible. Here's Nick Hopkins.
Edward Snowden electrified the debate about spying. But this government commission report seems, on the face of it, to be saying it's business as usual. David Anderson supports the need for bulk surveillance to fight crime and flush out terrorists. That means your phone calls and your emails could be caught up in trawls for wrongdoing. But he notes that Britons, on the whole, are pretty relaxed about snooping powers. So, is this a clear-cut victory for the spooks and the police? Far from it. The clues to Anderson's unease are in the title of his report, A Question of Trust, and the fact that it's taken him 372 pages to set out what he thinks needs to change, which is why perhaps ministers only gave it a lukewarm response today.
David Anderson's report provides a good basis for legislation, but we need to look carefully at all of the recommendations, and we'll come forward with our response in due course in the form of a draft bill.
On a number of key issues, Anderson has put the government in a tight spot. He wants judges, not ministers, to sign off bulk collection of material and data. He wants to scrap the commissioners who currently scrutinise agencies for a new independent surveillance and intelligence commission. And he says Britain's main surveillance law, the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act, is incomprehensible, undemocratic, unnecessary and intolerable.
The intelligence agencies have massively overstepped their mandate. Oversight has not been effective in reeling in the executive power in this country, and there needs to be an across-the-board root and branch reform to surveillance law to ensure that surveillance is transparent and accountable and respects the rights of privacy of ordinary British citizens.
Anderson wants new protections, but what about new powers? Snoopers' Charter would have given the police and security services access to an unprecedented amount of detail about our activity on the internet and on social networking sites, including what we search for. But Anderson says the police have yet to prove why they need to look at these so-called weblogs. It's not as if the current powers aren't working. Anderson says that in one case last year, bulk data analysis of Islamic State extremists foiled a bomb plot in Europe. But the police don't think it's enough, and they told us today they'd be coming back for more.
Our requirements for communications data will change as technology changes, and that's highlighted in Mr. Anderson's report. We need to make the operational case for weblogs as an example, but we will be looking to do that and to explore those issues in the coming months.
If the government agrees and gives them what they want, then Britain and the US will be pulling in different directions.
Now that the Freedom Act has passed and bulk retention of data has ceased in the US, in fact the privacy protections are better in the US now than they are in the UK. So we really think that this is a very opportune time for the UK to kind of bring itself up to the same standard and make the same reforms that the US is underway in making.
You know, all these issues, if there be issues...
For opponents of the Snoopers' Charter, like David Davis, judicial oversight of surveillance requests is the key, and they say they will keep pushing for it.
Anderson's highlighted a problem that the government ought to solve. It ought to be solving it without Anderson, but Anderson's highlighted it. They can no longer now avoid it. They have to face up to the fact our country is out of date. Almost no other country in the world gives politicians the power to surveil and intercept their citizens' communications, at least no civilised country. And now we're going to have to come up to date. We're going to have to come up to the 21st century.
Everybody agrees oversight is at the heart of this. But already, the mood music from Number 10 suggests they won't be shifting it away from politicians without a fight. So the stage is set. there's a potential battle ahead. Not one with the Liberal Democrats this time, but with the Tories' own backbenchers.
Nick Hopkins there. Well, joining me in the studio to discuss this is former Attorney General Dominic Grieve and journalist and author on the security services Stephen Gray. Hello, both of you. First of all, Dominic Grieve, the reaction to the report has been politically very muted. I mean, really across the board. We're talking about the Liberal Democrats not being in a position really anymore, but is it just accepted that we are going to have bulk surveillance unlike any other country, and don't you find that surprising?
Not necessarily. I think there's been a consensus that we needed to review the systems that we have, because I have absolutely no doubt that the Regulation of Investigatory Powers Act is completely out of date. It's no longer fit for purpose, and this really comes out of David Anderson's report. And so the Anderson report, obviously I haven't had a chance of reading every page of it, but the broad thrust of it, I suspect, is acceptable to the two main political parties. It highlights some of the really serious problems there are and comes up with some solutions. But it certainly doesn't suggest that the need to retain bulk data in order to carry out investigations is in some way excessive or wrong, because I think the point's been made already on a number of occasions, including by Sir Ian Lobban, who was the last head of GCHQ, that the retention of bulk data is only for the purpose of identifying within that data specific things which are going to be looked at, which is a rather different thing from bulk data surveillance.
On the question of who gives the nod for any operation, do you agree with David Anderson that actually the judiciary is more fit for purpose than politicians? After all, you have been both. You are both a lawyer and a politician. Do you agree with that?
I think there's a very powerful case he makes that in order to provide the necessary public reassurance in a new framework, involving the judiciary in this would be desirable, yes.
So you would be very unhappy if the Prime Minister did not take that up?
In fairness to the Prime Minister, he's got to go away and produce a response. This is the report he commissions, and we then have to look at it and look at the issues. But the idea of having independent scrutiny of the warrantry system so that the warrant is not just signed off by a politician seems to me to be a very desirable thing to do.
Stephen, is there anything in this, do you think, that's in any way reassuring for people who do not wish the creeping encroachment of surveillance?
Well, absolutely. I think that he's said let's have a blank slate. So there is a debate being opened up there.
Oh, he's not saying blank entirely. He's saying keep bulk surveillance.
Well, he said there isn't a case yet being made, for example, in the retention of all the data by commercial companies of internet logs, etc. I think the broader point is that, you know, he is introducing and proposing the use of judge scrutiny, you know, more scrutinisation of this whole surveillance process. But, you know, it doesn't go very far.
But why do you think, you know, 9/11, 7/7, why do you think that years after, America is prepared to take a step backwards, but we aren't? Is it something in our psyche? Is it something in the way that we view, for example, our constitutional rights as opposed to the Americans?
Well, I think so. I mean, just stepping back, this is a huge shift that's going on, a vast digitisation of our lives. There's almost self-espionage happening there, and we don't know quite how to deal with it on either side of the Atlantic. The Americans, you know, just feel more secure. We've cultivated in this country a sort of constant state of insecurity, but maybe it's a sort of post-imperial weakness, if you like, which the Americans just don't have. And it's on the right and on the left in the United States, you know, very clearly, you know, defending the rights of citizens and feeling concerned about these steps.
Yes, I was saying, why do you think that is, that there is a much greater feeling of protecting the rights of citizens in America than there is here in old Blighty?
It's a very difficult question to answer. I think on the whole in this country, people have seen the activities of our intelligence agencies as being relatively benign, protecting us from external threats. We don't seem to have had either particular examples or fears, for the majority of people, that the civil liberties of the individuals are being eroded. Now, that's not a reason for complacency, and those who are concerned about civil liberties are right to highlight their concerns. But you're asking me as to why the mood is different,
yes, why is it?
And I think that is the reason. I think the majority of people trust our agencies to do the job, to do it proportionately, and not to intrude on their privacy or unnecessarily.
Interestingly,
so I think it's a different mindset.
But it's about information, isn't it? Because in a way, in the same way that we're never going to know the role that this kind of surveillance has played in thwarting operations, not really, nor are we absolutely going to know the role it played in thwarting people when they shouldn't have been thwarted just from their daily lives. We can't know.
But what you can see is time and again, technical intelligence, surveillance actually gets it wrong. And the intelligence services in general, should welcome more scrutiny of their activities and, more accountability because, as I write about, time and again, we've seen cases where they get the wrong person or where activities are counterproductive. And in broader terms, what are they trying to do? Huge surveillance sweep, but what's often missing is the analytical capabilities to understand all these things. So I think you've got to look at, what do we want to spend our money on to get the country safer?
Thank you both very much indeed.